number 2 Georgia, 1.5-point favorite. How about that? Against number 4 Alabama in Tuscaloosa. The over-under I have for this one is 12. Yes, count them, 12 Nick Saban mentions. That's excluding College Game Day, obviously, because Saban's going to be there, and that's we're not doing a mention every time he talks, but we're going to get the graphics of Kirby's 1-5 mark against Saban. That's coming. We're going to get the shots of Saban up there in his suite, and he's going to be chatting it up with Miss Terry or something like that, or we'll get the shots of Saban chatting it up with former Bama players and or current recruits from his suite. That's coming. Can you imagine being a recruit, Will? You're on your official visit or something like that. You're kind of seeing the lay of the land, all that. And, whoever's showing you around just says, hey, you want to go hang out in Saban's suite for a quarter or something? I'm pretty sure if you auctioned that off, and you could answer this because you lived in the state of Alabama, if you auctioned off that opportunity to normal citizens in the state of Alabama, at least $10,000, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is going to be such a funny game for that reason. It's going to be a lot of changing leaves, as they would say.
Yeah, very much so. And look, Saban is the elephant in the room. I mean, pun very much intended, of course. On the field that is named after him, his presence or potentially lack of a presence, it's going to be felt. And how could it not be? This is the type of matchup that he lived for. And in a weird way, this actually hasn't been the type of matchup that Kirby has lived for. This sounds like a knock, but it's not. And I'm not just talking about the Bama aspect. I'm more just talking about what he's facing as a road team in this atmosphere. Kirby is in year 9 at Georgia, Will.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, which is just weird in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, time is flying. It really is. He has only had 2 true road games against an AP top 10 team. Can you name them?
One of them was that Clemson stinker, right?
Mm-mm.
Wow, they still weren't. We'd figured them out by then. Road games against a top 10 team. Oh man, I'm thinking none of the Florida games because that's Jacksonville.
Yep.
Man, yeah, I don't think they've gone to. Yeah, because that game was at home. I actually don't know those 2 games.
2017 at Auburn, game that they got waxed.
Georgia for that game. Yep.
Georgia enters number 1 in the country, and they lose that game 40-17, something like that. And then, of course, he gets the rematch that he wins in the SEC championship. And then the other one, I'm kind of reluctant to count it, not because of the quality of the teams, but 2020 at Alabama. Because
that game wasn't that was one I thought of, but that was just such a weird year for Georgia.
Weird year for everyone because that's not a full house. It was a COVID reduced crowd. So we'll get to more of this discussion later with Wes about how unique of an opportunity this is for Kirby on the road. But think about that. He has only had 1 instance in his career at Georgia in which he's been in a true road game against an AP top 10 team that had a full crowd. That's kind of crazy. And in case you were wondering, I looked this up because I'm a loser and I was very curious. Saban, 8-3 in his career in those games. Also, in case you were wondering, Kalen DeBoer, 2-0 in those games in his 4 seasons as a head coach. Not as relevant, seeing as how Kalen DeBoer is coaching the home team. But against AP top 15 teams, if you were curious what that number is for Kalen DeBoer, 8-2. Pretty good. And the losses were when he was at Fresno State in 2021, when he lost to Oregon by 7, an Oregon team that the following week they went on the road and beat Ohio State in Columbus, ended up being a 10-win team. And then last year at Washington.
There you go, Oregon. You could finally say you beat this guy.
Right? Just not Dan Lanning. And then last year.
Angry as heck from that one game. He's like, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah, seriously. And then, of course, last year, Washington loses to Michigan in the national championship, in case you somehow didn't see it. But Kalen DeBoer has been pretty darn good against top 15 teams in his career. If he wins this game, so much of the conversation nationally will shift to how Bama isn't going anywhere. Dynasty isn't dead. You thought that you killed Bama with Nick Saban being gone and da-da-da-da. No, Bama's going to be just fine. If Kirby wins this game, the conversation will shift to the shrinking list of coaches who can stop Kirby in a post-Saban world. It's not that Kalen DeBoer is necessarily on that list right now. It's that we don't know if he is going to be on that list right now. Huge ramifications on both sides. Obviously, those dynamics are at play. I can't wait to see how Kirby and Glenn Schumann approach the Jalen Milroe assignment again.
Mm-hmm.
Last year in the SEC championship, Milroe won that game with his arm, and he won that game with his legs. It was the arm that made it a 10-point game in the middle of the fourth quarter, and it was his legs that picked up the 2 first downs and put Georgia's three-peat bid not just on the back burner, but completely off the stove. That's what he did to that team. Georgia should be the healthier team in the trenches, I would guess, if they get some of those guys back up front. Potentially going to have Michael Williams back. He's been banged up in the first part of the season, unfortunately. That would be huge to be able to potentially test that Bama offensive line, especially those Bama tackles, which I do not necessarily think we can be convinced that they have turned the corner. Still not sure how they're going to hold up against guys that can get after the quarterback. I expect Jalen Walker will be able to do that as well. If we saw a lot of Jalen Walker on Caden Proctor, would not surprise me one bit. Can Georgia disguise those looks and confuse Jalen Milroe in his 4th game in this offense? I don't know. But I think he's been pretty darn good to start. And he's had some tough moments against USF where they just couldn't necessarily finish drives. And, it was rough at points during that game. But he's yet to throw a pick, and he's taken 5 sacks through 3 games. And I think with how bad that USF game was for Bama's offensive line, you could say, like, it's actually kind of surprising. Like, we saw
better than it was without him.
But, right? I mean, seriously, like a year earlier, it was 5 sacks and a half would have felt like it was a victory for that Bama offensive line. If Milroe is settled in, and if he's throwing these deep balls to Ryan Williams, not ideal for Georgia. I would expect a lot of Julian Humphrey to draw that assignment in the Georgia secondary, perhaps a bit less Malachi Starks at the line of scrimmage. I would expect Malachi Starks a bit more over the top and trying to help out against a 17-year-old, in case you haven't heard, who currently leads all of FBS with 28.5 yards per catch. Ryan Williams has been as advertised, if not better than that. And
man, I love him so much. I sent you a picture that like his 13-year-old sister had painted his nails. He is just the coolest guy. Like when success finds you that early, a lot of times guys just shut it down. And everything I've seen of him is just a big, smiley, happy lad. And that's just so great to see.
Dude is balling. I mean, to be at this stage of his career and to be cooking dudes the way that he has in the first part of the season, look, I am certainly impressed. And I am impressed as someone that said take the under on whatever the freshman season projection is for him, because of all those things that I kept bringing up about the true freshman receivers in the SEC in the last 8 years. But he has certainly looked the part so far.
We talked about that with Coleman, not Ryan Williams, so not technically wrong.
Yeah, not the worst take in the world. Ryan Williams is he's going to probably flirt with the 800-yard mark, I would assume, with how big play of a threat he's been so far. And if you can do it against Georgia, buddy, you can do it against anyone. I think Georgia fans would prefer, as weird as it sounds, not to see Ryan Williams on Dalen Everett, who hasn't had the best start to the season. SEC StatCat had him as the most yards allowed per target among SEC corners. Not great for that guy. But Julian Humphrey looks the part so far. And again, Malachi Starks over the top. You feel all right about that if you're Georgia. But what's that going to look like? Because Georgia's pass defense, they've allowed 1 pass play of 20 yards this season, came against Everett. Bama, same thing. 1 pass play of 20 yards allowed. That's the best in the country. Those 2 teams, they have eliminated those chunk plays in the passing game. Both of these teams would like to be able to test that. This is a huge game for the Milroe perception. If you're a Milroe hater, and if you want a chance to be able to say this guy can't throw and he sucks and look what he can't do, you're hoping that Georgia is going to be the team to make you feel better about that take. Because if they don't, I don't know who will. Okay? I don't. I think that this is a game in which if he wins, we have to talk about the club that he'd be joining, Will. Who is the only starting quarterback who beat Kirby Smart twice?
Joe Burrow.
Yes, sir. That's it.
See, I like how we slanted the numbers a little bit, okay? We're not counting number 13 LSU who smacked Kirby Smart at home. I see how it is.
No. Well, I was talking about true road games.
No, I know. It was 2018. I was just kidding. They went into Baton Rouge, but they were like number 13, so it was outside.
Oh yeah. We're just talking top 10 teams. Yeah. Strictly top 10 in that. But yeah, Joe Burrow beat him twice, and that second game wasn't close. I mean,
first game wasn't close.
First game wasn't particularly close either. First game was, I thought the LSU ground game was awesome that day. Absolutely awesome. And Georgia really couldn't get anything going in Death Valley. But Yeah, I mean, Burrow played with a different offense year 2 against Kirby. Milroe playing in a different offense year 2 against Kirby. What does it look like? How does Kirby respond to that? It's something he's probably been thinking about for 10 months. But if Milroe does join that ever exclusive club, think about the guys who couldn't. Bryce Young couldn't do it. Tua couldn't do it. Jalen Hurts couldn't do it because they both needed each other to come in relief. So I don't think we can definitively say that they beat Kirby twice. I don't think that's fair. But it's a really difficult thing to do. And with Saban, that was something we always talked about, right? Beating Saban twice. Good luck. Many a Heisman Trophy winner tried, couldn't do it. Tebow couldn't do it. Manziel couldn't do it. We saw. I mean, Burrow was one who wasn't able to do it. Like the only guy who could, ironically enough, was somebody that's already been mentioned on this show, Jordan Jefferson. That's it. And then even Jordan Jefferson, and the third time he had to face Saban, 92 yards of offense, national championship. I don't need to go there. I didn't choose violence today. Well, I didn't.
That's the thing about Nick Saban. You beat Nick Saban, you just got to keep playing Nick Saban. Georgia fans know this too well. You better lose the first meeting with Nick Saban so you can win the second one, all right?
He doesn't lose. People just quit instead of playing him more often. That's the way to do it.
You're locked in some kind of a Greek tragedy where you just got to keep playing Nick Saban until
Exactly. Exactly. But like these are the types of things that I think we need to bring up with Kirby as it relates to like how unstoppable of a force in this sport are you? And we know the stat about the fact that no coach besides Nick Saban has beat him since 2020. It was Dan Mullen, who, by the way, is in year 3 in media. So if it's just a weird thing to say out loud.
So familiar with his healthcare package.
Oh, it really is.
Cemented.
He's doing well. I don't think old Dan is hurting for work anytime soon. I'm pretty sure those medical bills are doing just fine. He's taken care of. But is DeBoer about to end that streak? Is he about to become that guy? Will Kirby's boogeyman be a coach or a program? That's the question. That's the question that we need to see answered. We are going to get an answer on this. I went back and forth, Will. Back and forth. Then I came back to what Marty Smith said on this show a month ago. Georgia's motivated by that SEC championship loss. 10 months to think about that game. Just as they look when they're behind the wheel, I think the dogs come out real fast. Real fast.
Come on, bro.
Sorry, that's sitting right there. Come on. Even Georgia fans, you know.
I feel bad for laughing at that. That's how good that joke is.
I think Georgia this time is the one that keeps Bama at an arm's length. And instead of Georgia being the team that feels like, man, we just can't get that go-ahead score, we can't get that stop that we need to, it's Bama that's in that spot. I think we're reminded that Carson Beck is pretty darn good, despite the fact that this start hasn't been what many, myself included, expected from him. But also that Georgia's discipline on the defensive side of the ball is second to none. That's going to set the tone in this one. I think it's a game that Milroe starts off slow and settles in, but not enough to beat Georgia. And I think it ends with him making a late mistake. Georgia wants a reckoning. I think that begins on Saturday night with a 31-28 Georgia victory. Also of note, I've now picked Georgia to win against Bama each of the last 5 times, and I'm currently 1-3 so far. So take that with a grain of salt.
Different regime. Yeah. So before we get started, I just got to share this little anecdote. I know we never ever talk about politics, but I'm gonna break that rule one time to tell you something funny that we got to be aware of. First off, you talked about Saban is going to be like at this game, right? So he's probably going to be. Do you think he's going to be on the Bama sideline?
I think he's going to be in his suite.
Yep. Okay.
Not on the sideline. No, Saban doesn't want to be on the sideline.
That's fair. Yeah. So yeah, he's done that enough. So knows every blade of the grass. Anyway, so Donald Trump is going to be at this game, and he's going to have one goal before the end of the day. It's going to be to take a picture with Nick Saban. And Nick Saban is going to have one goal for the end of the day. It's going to be to not take a picture with Donald Trump because he is famously apolitical. And there's going to be a chess match between these two people who will both be in suites where Trump is trying to get a picture with Nick Saban, and Nick Saban is going to the restroom. I'll be right back for 4 hours.
So what you're saying, Will, is that the battle between Saban and Trump will equal the battle on the field between Smart and DeBoer. That's what you're saying.
I think we got to really appreciate this mini game because Saban is such a good like PR finesser guy who never takes the bad picture, never has the bad quote, and Trump is always trying to just get his hands, get the handshake, get the smiling picture. And I know post-retirement, Nick Saban does not want to deal with those problems. So just be aware of that, everyone. If you see the picture come out, that means Saban is lost. Anyway, because he didn't want to do it with anyone. It's not being political. If it was Harris, he would do the same thing. Anyway, moving on to the actual game. So there's something I'm going to come back around to this, right? So you talked about the 2018 game, the way that that game was won, like the like LSU game that was in Death Valley, right? That was the beginning of the end for Jake Fromm, right? And the way that Dave Aranda was able to kind of engineer that was there were several key points in that game where he said, "Okay, we are going to put everyone in single coverage and send pressure. Jake Fromm can't read a field." And in response, who's Georgia's OC in 18? I think that was still our boy, right?
18 would have been James Coley.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, there we go. It's another greatest hits guy, right?
So wait, 18 would have been, oh gosh, was that oh gosh, why am I blanking on the name? He went to Tennessee right after. It wasn't James Coley.
Who went Jim Chaney.
Jim Chaney.
Jim
Chaney and James Coley is too similar of a name, and I realized they look nothing alike whatsoever.
Well, actually, they were both there, and they were co-OCs. So there you go. So whoever made that decision between the two NPCs that we've discussed, right? They said, you know what? I'm going to go 5 wide. If you guys remember this in this game. And Dave Aranda said, I don't care. This guy can't read past 2 receivers or even 1. We're going to keep sending the house and put you in single coverage. And it imploded Jake Fromm. And I think it shook his confidence, and that led to Kirby kind of rebuilding the offense, right? And that actually is an underrated part of this whole ascension of going, we got to have a quarterback who can win these matchups. Well, now they have one, right? Now they have a quarterback who can win those matchups. So I think that, just as we have done with Nick Saban over the years, or with Alabama more specifically, right? We pick out these losses and say, what do we learn? Well, for a while, Saban, it was the mobile quarterback thing because, Cam, Jefferson, and you talked about a little bit of Garcia in there, right? So I think that is a weakness that's already been corrected. Now, not the Carson Beck we saw last week. Let me start there, okay? Talking about we talked about the Mark Stoops, puke on your shoes game. I think we're both in lockstep here that game is just a game that Kirby Smart has every year, right? Yeah. It's a game on the road. Because if that Georgia team shows up, it's not going to be good.
I don't know that Georgia team. What's a way to say this? I don't think that Bama's strengths line up necessarily with Kentucky's strengths to force Georgia into that type of a game. If they play a game that's 13-12, I'd be stunned. I just think there are going to be more chances that Georgia's going to be willing to take downfield, and they're going to try and get those chunk plays in the passing game, because I think they kind of realize, like, we need to be able to hit on some of that, and we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't. And I'm not saying that they held all the good plays for Bama. I'm not saying that. Don't interpret it that. I'm not trying to disrespect Kentucky, but I just don't think they play in that type of a game.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. And I mean, I think it is just kind of being more conservative against a more conservative coach, right? At the end of the day, I think that, you're not saving the good plays, but unless we're going to assume that, like, Mark Stoops, really had Kirby where he wanted him, right? And was really just had him in a box. I think it's closer to playing like playing mistake-free football overall else, which you can never really do, right? So I think you're going to have to open up the offense, which is what they couldn't do in 18. That's where I'm bringing it all the way around, right? So you can't play that style of Georgia game. You can't play the Jake Fromm style. You can't play the last week against Kentucky where the defense starts to load the box and you can't make them pay, right? Georgia is a team that historically, and even now, when the SEC has gone through these weird offensive line grips where you're like, wow, Kentucky can't block and Arkansas can't block, Alabama can't block. Georgia's always been pretty good at that, right? So it's as people have started to go more towards kind of like the 22 personnel, bringing in tight ends, and we saw that with Washington and Bowers. Georgia was actually kind of on the forefront of that in a funny way, where they started going bigger and heavier and pushing teams around that were in more of kind of like that nickel-based defense with the extra DBs, right? So point being, Georgia isn't old school. They were first to the new kind of what the NFL is trying to figure out now, where you see more too high. You can't spread the ball out with 3-4 wide receivers. You got to punch guys in the mouth, right? So that being said, against this Alabama team, you do not want to get in a rock fight with this Alabama team, who has a super mobile quarterback, who has Ryan Williams, who can be a game breaker on any play, who is a stable at running backs. Like, you just don't want to do that, especially against a guy like DeBoer, who we've talked about, the cocktail napkin guys that can just make up plays, right? DeBoer can just throw 10 plays into a game you've never seen in your life before. You do not want to be in that style of game. And, not to like, pick on Georgia's offense or anything, but like with Mike Bobo, but like, he's just never really been that guy that's going to give you this crazy design of a play that you're like, whoa, I don't know who has the ball. The cameraman's lost. So I think Georgia needs to play confidently. And I think we're going to see a lot really early in this game. I think in the first 5 or so minutes in this game, if we see old school Mike Bobo, I don't think you're going to be able to get to halftime and make adjustments if you're playing against a team like Alabama. Now, that being said, like we've talked about, with the bully graduating, right? And we've seen this with Lanning and Oregon, where he couldn't beat Washington. Now he didn't have to deal with that anymore. This is as big, if not bigger, than any game, I think, outside of that national championship game, because at the end of the day, it trickles down into everything, right? It trickles down into recruiting, perception, all this different stuff. If Kirby Smart cannot beat this version of Alabama that was just slightly decimated, not a la some of these other schools in the transfer portal, right? We've seen, guys leave. We've seen, this kind of like, I don't even want to call it a scramble because like we talked about, they did it pretty professionally, about as good as you can say. But it's not a continuity. It's guys learning new playbooks. It's guys having new coordinators, all this different stuff. So if your whole thing at Georgia is come to Georgia, we are a program, a la what Tom Brady said, right? We have a certain offense we run. We recruit a certain type of player, a tight end. We don't recruit receivers. No, but like point being, like we have a program. This is what we do, and all these other teams are going to go, where they're going to be washed over like sandcastles. It's really, it's Kirby and Mark Stoops in terms of like the oldest coaches in the SEC right now, or like the coaches that have been around the longest tenured coaches, not the oldest.
Yeah, they're the elder statesmen of the SEC. They're the only two coaches in the SEC who have coached their respective programs in a game that was played in the 2010s.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so scary about this with Georgia, whereas if you're at home, you have DeBoer, who you don't expect Alabama to, like most people do not expect Alabama to win a national championship this year. And that's the first time I can remember that since like the Bush administration. Like this is, if Alabama does not win a national championship this year, it will not be disappointing. They have a first year head coach who everybody is trying to get him to comment on everything and get him out of his element. He's doing a great job at not doing that. It's about establish that you can win in the SEC, right? Historically, Georgia has struggled with these style of games. I will say this is lined up for kind of the inverted wear black at the funeral game, where it's like Alabama has been that bully, right? Georgia knows, and Kirby knows how hard it is to have the target on your back. He's already been through all of this. What you can't have is beat the final boss of the game and have him have a final form. You can't then go, oh, this Alabama team is at eye level with me. You got to keep them a step or two down, because we know that when these games are a pick 'em game, it can go anybody's way. I'll just say it like that. It is not going one team's way, right? So I think that this is a statement game for Georgia, and I think they come out and play that way. I know I've been pretty overly negative to Georgia here, but it's real. The record is what the record is, right? We could talk about how, Saban's no longer there, but I think after last year's game, that might be a little bit of a good thing on the offensive side of the ball, right? I think that, Alabama was not a great team last year, just be honest, right? They were a team that we talked about Milroe going off script. We've talked about this ad nauseum in the SEC championship game. It wasn't the plays that Tommy Rees was calling. It was the runs. It was the decisions. It was the big downs that Milroe beat them on. This year is the offensive coordinator who understands what a player like Ryan Williams can do, which I don't think they did last year, right? So point being, I think that in this new regime, you got to stay that step ahead. You got to stay that step ahead, because if they even the playing field in your house, I think that's a big deal. And what we saw this already as is the Tennessee game. And I hate to compare those two programs because I know the level of success they both had, but we've seen the high-flying offense go into Sanford Stadium and more or less die. I don't think that's the kind of team that Bama has because of the physicality and the kind of the lack of attrition that Tennessee didn't have to deal with because they kind of indicted their own coach. But point being, I think that home atmosphere, the Georgia defense, and one thing that's so scary about DeBoer too, I just want to keep giving both of these coaches their flowers just in case, because I could really see Bama winning this. But one thing about DeBoer that we've hit on is that in these ranked games, he is a killer, dude. He has beaten teams, as an underdog. He has beaten teams as a favorite. We talked about it over and over again about Oregon last year, where the first matchup, everybody said we got lucky. Second matchup, they beat him even worse, right? And they were underdog in the second matchup. So yeah, I think you can't give a guy like that. He's like a piranha, man. Once he starts smelling blood, I think Georgia has had the hiccup in the road. They have seen what happens when they conservative. They don't want any more of that. I think at the end of the day, like I think we see Georgia come out having fun, playing Georgia football, establishing that dominance. Now, if we see them come out kind of like tight and scared, we know what kind of game this is. It's a game like last week, and they can't win that game against Alabama.
You picking Georgia?
Yeah, I'm picking Georgia, and I think Georgia will score into the 30s, kind of like you. I'm going to go about like 35-28.
35-28. Yeah. I think that there are so many different matchups that you could point to and say, if blah 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 wins this, then obviously that's the key. Everywhere you kind of look, it feels like strength on strength. And even the Bama secondary that Nick Saban himself questioned coming into the year has been, I think, better than people have expected to. Now you kind of look at the quarterbacks that they faced so far, and you're like, all right, who's really tested them? With all due respect to TJ Finley, and Byron Brown is a nice player, but that they weren't necessarily going to be able to test you on the outside. So like,
they're quarterbacks we all knew.
Yeah, that's true. Wisconsin's backup, we didn't know.
Yeah, that's true.
We didn't know.
Yeah.
Tyler Van Dyke we knew, but unfortunately it didn't play out that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that the takeaways are just going to be so significant from this one. I can't wait for this on Saturday night. Awesome matchup. For all the people that are like, hey, I'm sick of Georgia and Bama playing each other. At least it's not the SEC championship. Yeah, I mean, like I get it if you have that fatigue in the SEC championship because it's like I'm not seeing my team play. I am instead watching these two teams play over and over. But like I tweeted this stat out, and it's remarkable to think about. Bama and Georgia are playing as top 4 teams for the 6th time since the start of the 2017 season. Michigan and Ohio State, they've done that 6 times in the last 50 years, Will.
Yep.
This is creme de la creme. I appreciate this as a college football fan. I understand I have a different perspective than a Tennessee fan, an Auburn fan, a Florida fan, anybody would watching this game. But it should be awesome on Saturday night, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, to your point too, this is not, Bama, Clemson, or even Bama, LSU, where you have kind of like these like either one-sided games or like kind of stodgy games. All these games have been funny in some way. Like, say what you will, but like Stetson fumbling and then the Ringo pick six is funny. Like the SEC championship last year,
Bama fans would disagree with a pick six to lose a national championship.
But the SEC championship game was funny. That's what I'm saying. Like where it's like, wow, we both picked this team by like 10. They are not playing well today. And like each of these games have been fun. Like they've been fun to watch. Even the SEC championship game that Georgia lost before the Natty was like, what? Like, who is this team? And so like, where's this defense? And so, yeah, I think that each of these games has had some kind of an unexpected result. To your point about picking, Georgia and Bama winning, but in the Natty, right, they had already lost and then they came back. So yeah, this is a really good rivalry. I think if you don't like this, you don't like college football, but like they've both really held up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.